Good morning, good evening, everyone. This is Kumar Pushpak again joining in, along with Tim Jerome, who is a well known name in the area of project management. He's a consultant, he's a trainer, and he's a career coach as well. Uh, I myself head the team here at Ijona Services, which is a software company, and we also provide trainings out there. Now, but this particular talk show is basically to talk on the current affairs and bothering people out there. And in that regards, today the topic that we have chosen is relates to US, California, West Coast side of the US. There had been news around wherein the wildfire has actually spreading uh, like crazy. People have been advised to stay away or to leave the place, vacate the place, and that's what we're going to discuss. Right, Tim?
Yeah, let's get the scope of this. Okay,
So, could you just, yeah,
this is crazy. So you think about this. I'm 20 hours away by car from California. Okay, and for the last 3 weeks, we have had poor air alerts. in New Mexico, and you can actually in New Mexico, it's a little better today, but at night you can actually, as the sun is setting, look at the sun and your eyes don't hurt. And the same thing in Denver, Colorado. And Colorado is having fire, and we have Oregon, and Oregon's on fire. And Oregon, that it's like California. It's a huge amount of people, and they're in a small area, and it is very frightening. They have had been in a drought condition for 7 years, and they've been having small wildfires, and they were pretty bad. But this is the worst. And actually, in Oregon, for 2 days last week, they had the poorest air on the planet because of this. And we are starting to discuss internally, in communities and nationally, the fact that we are starting to observe movements of people. We're talking about people moving, not just individuals and families saying, I can't put up with this. We have movements of people, and the scientists are saying this is just the tip of the iceberg. They had a 4.5 earthquake last week too, and they're used to this. This is not stress anymore. This is fear. This is something that I don't want to face, and it is there. I open the door. It's like the first days of pandemic, except it's always there. This is scary. It's very real, and it's not just real for 1 or 3 or 5 people. It's real for everybody between California and wherever they're going. And we have
mhm.
to address this. This
Can you take us in the little history, maybe a decade or a couple of decades? Uh, is this the first time, or is it something which has been happening year on year? Uh, what's the history around?
For the last 3 or 4 years, there have been forest fires, and the last 3 years, they've had firefighters from across the country gather together and fight the fires in
Mhm.
California because it's dry, it's big, and California makes a lot of the food. A lot of the vegetables we eat here in New Mexico, and a lot of the fruit we eat here in New Mexico comes from California. You can't threaten that. And so we've been doing a pretty good job. Now, I hate to say this, but the good news, quote unquote good, we don't have happy news. The good news is people in visible positions are having their lives threatened. Movie
Mhm.
stars, sports people, they are starting to have their houses threatened. So we're starting to see this as a much more visible discussion. This is huge. I mean, huge. And this is just California. Now, picture that, okay? We have this going on. We have migration of people. And we'll talk about how big this is in just a few minutes, okay? I'll give you some historical perspective on this. On the other
There is
side,
also fear. You just
go ahead.
yeah. No, you just mentioned about the migrants, and there has a fear around the people out there. So, I mean, since you're living out there, pretty near to the place, would you like to explain what kind of fear and how this is prevailing, how this is troubling people out there?
People are generally prone to be lazy. Okay. I want a home. I want to come home every day and have a predictable meal with my predictable family. I want routine. And this is entire communities. This is small villages, small towns that are saying we need to uproot and leave. We've been having this small thing for the last 20 years because, Los Angeles, people don't want to live there. Now, New Mexico, where I live, is wonderful. It's the fourth largest state in the country, and it only has 1.4, 1.6 million people in it. So it's broad, but it's not too livable for most people, and it doesn't have major industry. So there's never been a draw for people to come to my state. Come to our state. It's wonderful, but it's hard to make a living. And we're seeing people come there. And so you have two stressors. You have people who are fearing for their lives and willing to go for weeks, if not months, without a salary, leaving California, and they're coming to places that, we already have 40 million people without jobs, and they're migrating, and the people who are in the cities right now are saying, whoa, what am I going to do? And so you're having this incredible frustration. And a lot of our country is prone to, let's put up walls and keep the other people out. And so this sense of otherness and frustration and this polarization is just making things even worse. This is frightening. Now, it gets even funnier. These are crazy, crazy, crazy times. Because on the other side of the country, we keep on having hurricanes. We've never done this before, and we ran out of letters for the number of hurricanes we're having. And a hurricane comes, and it can create 1, 3, 5, or 7 tornadoes. And we can't handle all this. It's not even physically handling. It's not monetarily handling. It's intellectually handling. We can't wrap our heads around this. And we have this conversation in the back of our minds for the last 10 years saying there's no such thing as climate change. And it's like nature is rubbing our nose in the dirt and saying, when are you going to wake up? And it's creating, like I said, it's no longer stress. It is fear. Are these the end times? Are these actually threatening our society? Complex society cannot maintain itself with too many things going on. Okay, and that's the fear that we're looking at. And when fear gets this big, we can't face it. It's not that we're afraid to face it. It's just that we can't wrap our heads around it.
But then what should people do in this case?
Okay. There are some traditional steps around fear. Whether it's real or whether it's imagined, fear comes from your head. Fear is smaller than your brain. Fear is a response to what's going on outside of your body. the first step you do is slow down, okay? And this works whether you're in an emergency situation or whether you're in a slow grinding field like we're in. It's just you need to process. You need to get a cup of coffee, take a break, and you need to sit down, think about it. You need to steady. You need to get grounded. The worst thing we can do is try to act and think in the middle of a highly emotional environment. So basically getting grounded and rooted in your body, mind, and heart. Make sure that you're thinking properly, test and evaluate your logic, make sure your emotions are not necessarily in control, but you understand what emotions are going through you. Like take an inventory. Okay, I feel this, and I feel like this is big. This is not a 5 or a 7. This is a 9 or a 10 or 11. And also your check in with your intuition. We all know when we're not connected to our root, when we're not connected to our initiation. And then we can actually say, okay, okay, here I am. What can I do? Right? First of all, imagine the worst. And, basically half of California comes to New Mexico. And what are we going to do here? Well, we're going to figure it out. We always have. New Mexico is rooted in 500 to 600 years of small Spanish ranches. We actually had the Spaniards coming up from 1600s from central Mexico into New Mexico. And so we have this old mentality of villages and farms where people gather together. And we realize that's where we are. This analysis is important. And second of all, we're not talking about today. Today, I don't see a lot of people camped out in my front yard. It's not real yet. It's highly probable. It's very highly probable. It's probably around the 70 to 80% probability, but it's a risk. It's not real yet. And then finally, talk about it. Not on the news. This is not a reality show. Talk about it and talk it through. We have a unique ability to band together as rational human beings and be able to ground ourselves and be able to slow ourselves down, not just as individuals, but as groups, by actually slowing down, getting grounded, and starting to talk. And talk in not just what if or what might, because what if and what might all of a sudden becomes real. That's where the monsters, that's where the fear comes in. Actually getting quantifiable discussions and using our rational mind to settle down the monsters so we can actually think about this and start making plans. And we can overcome anything. That's what we're dealing with right now. That's how big we are. We'll see this. Human beings are wonderful. We do this without even having to think about it. We're wired for this. But it is really interesting. And this is just like I said, I agree with the scientists on this one. This is going to be a discussion. We've already had it though, haven't we, Kumar? Haven't we seen migration in Europe with migration from country to country? This is going to be much more prevalent, and we're going to have to understand and wrap our heads around it, not just as individuals, but nations. Now, this is a big thing, and one of the things that we need to think about is this is real. It is highly probable. But the thing is, we're thinking about probabilities. If you look back at history, this is really real. And history, like I said, I often say it doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes real well. I am going to give everyone a message of hope. Okay, in the end, this is hope, but I want us to actually start talking about this because there is some things that we can do as individuals and groups. The strength of villages, the strength of communities, the strength of individuals. But we do need to talk about this seriously.
Is government doing enough?
Okay, let me give you a little bit of background. I'm not
The
political.
reason I'm asking this question, Tim, I'm sorry. The reason I'm asking this question because in a couple of weeks you have an election coming up.
Okay, I'm gonna give you two sides of the coin. Okay, government never does anything enough, and when they do enough, they always do too much. Okay, right now there have been missteps in the last 3 years, severe missteps, and so there's a high distrust of government. Okay, and there's been miscommunication to such a level that our environment can't really trust government to give them valid information. It's not lying or anything, it's just the missteps. And it there if you look back, I'm actually doing some interesting research. It's horrible. The stuff I the stuff I like to read is the downfall of societies, complex societies, and how they fall apart. And it seems that inept government is not a causal factor. It's not stupid leaders. It's not devious governments such. Now, they're a correlative factor. They do show that there's a correlation there, but it's not a causation. And actually, it's not necessarily it's not necessarily either the fact that you have all of this mishandling of the economics either, or abuse of the availability of money, corruption, right? That's not a factor either. But the problem is it contributes to the fear, and that's the problem. Government's going to do the right thing, and it's going to be slow, and it's going to be very, very, very heavy-handed. Now, local government is taking action, and we've seen this. We saw this with COVID, with the pandemic. Local government are so close to the people, they have no choice. They have to take action, or their families are at risk. That's the beauty of state and community government. They're in it with us, and so they take quick action. This is a beautiful thing. It's frustrating and it's angry. It's frustrating and angry to see the drama. It's again, we're tired of living a reality show between local government trying to push for action and the federal government saying, "Wait, we got to be fair across the whole country," and this is traditionally how it's gone. It's been managed pretty well. Off and on, there have been about 5 presidents who created a cabinet who mismanaged. And when it's mismanaged, it turns into a fist fight. And when it's managed well, it creates some tension that creates innovation, and it's not being managed well right now. I know I'm dancing around the answer, but I want to give you a little bit of context. That's the big picture.
No, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
That's what we're struggling with. Yeah, it's strange. It really is. And here's the problem. Um, we're playing some games at the societal and political level, and we have external influencers that are saying, you guys have to pay attention to something else. These silly little dances you're doing aren't going to cut it for the next 20 or 30 years. One of the things that we can deal with is a fire. One of the things we can deal with is an earthquake. One of the things we can deal with is drought. And when they all hit us, they all add their extra weight. But what we have a hard time managing is the unknown. I don't know what's going to happen. 2020 is the year where you're afraid to say the sentence, what else could possibly happen? Because it's going to. Are we going to have a UFO crash into the White House? Are we going to have another pandemic? Are we going to have, something happening right now that we look back 20 years from now and say we should have seen this coming? These black swans. And these are the things that are creating the fear. It's the thing that we cannot measure the size of. It's the monster in our dreams that we don't see, that we're afraid of.
Right. I see what you're saying. I was just trying to correlate with my India context. I mean, in India, three of the major cities in India anyway have poor quality before pandemic. In this pandemic, the good part was the air quality has actually became better because the vehicles movement were not much. But otherwise, yeah, India is quite familiar with the bad quality of the air, and I can completely correlate what you're talking in. The fire, wildfire is something that we spoke about the fear. You also discussed on how we can actually take care of those fear. But tell me, what is the potential losses that as a country you are seeing out there because
Let me
of
give
this?
you some context, okay? um, Change in climate is large. It's big and it's slow. It's like losing an iceberg or losing a mountain. You don't notice it over time, but over generations you say, this is bad. There are photographs of mountain ranges in the museum in the state capital in New Mexico. And you look back and you see in the 1800s lush forests, and you see in the 1950s and 1960s utter devastation where all the trees were taken from all of the mountains and all they had was mud. And we don't see this, and it's slow and it's huge. It's not humans making this happen. It's not nature causing this to happen. It's an interaction between human behavior and a response from nature. And so this is the issue. The big thing is we've forgotten our roots. Um, let me give you a little bit of context, okay? So one of the things that we ran out of in the pandemic was yeast. Now, in the US, we make all our bread from yeast, right? And
Mhm.
we didn't have any for weeks and weeks. I'm talking about a month and a half. You couldn't get any in the store, and nobody could, keep up with manufacturing of yeast for all the demand. It was sort of like fun, right? To actually do something in the house. It was a nice little hobby, and people got used to it. And all of a sudden we didn't have yeast and we couldn't play and we got bored again. But all of a sudden, also in the stores, we popped up and we saw, oh, You don't need yeast to make bread. You can put flour and water out on your counter for a few days, and you can get yeast from the very air. And we started making sourdough bread, and all of a sudden it was fun. And what do you know? A few weeks later, almost the whole country ran out of flour. Can you imagine going to a store and not having flour? And we are 1 or 2 generations away from having to make our own bread. Our grandparents made their own bread, not because it was a fun or it was a little toy or something to keep us distracted, but because this is the way you made it. You don't have the money to go to bread and go to the store and bread store and buy bread. You don't do that. You buy flour. And we're thinking, wow, is this real? Is this something that could be in our future? And again, this is our rational mind doing what it's supposed to do, extrapolating and trying to predict. And this is what it could be. Now, I don't know what nature has in store for us, but I do know one thing, okay? Let's talk about the collapse of empires. Let's talk about collapse of complex societies. Go back to 2300, Sumer and Akkad, right, in the Fertile Crescent region. They had over 100 years of climate change. The salts in the dirt started coming up, and they couldn't grow their wheat anymore. Now, they had political unrest. The silly countries were always fighting each other, right? You have Sargon on one side and you have the other guy on the other side. And they're fighting. In the meantime, I can't grow my wheat. Now, Sumer was interesting. They had a mix of grains that was 10% barley to 90% wheat. Over 100 years, we have an evidence of a transition over to 90% barley and 10% wheat, because barley is much more hardy and it can handle that. It's not as flexible, and you have to work with it a little different than wheat, but it's still doable. And so they figured out this was, and the transition wasn't just a year and they switched over. This is a natural occurrence, and this was humanity responding slowly over time. Now, number one, this is not what humans learned. This is humans being part of nature, and this is humans interacting with the changes of nature, okay? Keep that in mind. Now, we also have about 1200 to 100, we have the end of the Bronze Age, just 1,000 years later. And we have the Hittites, we have the Minoan culture, we have 7 societies that ceased to exist. I'm not saying they trickled down. I'm saying out of 9 big civilizations in 100 years, only one existed, and that was Egypt. And it was crippled and never got big again out of the collapse of the Bronze Age. The others were gone. Now, there are probably about 6 or 7 correlative factors. Climate change again. You have war, you have internal strife, polarization of politics was always a thing. Riots were almost bigger than that. You have drought and famine, you have disease, and there's 2 other things. One of the 2 things that we have right now, which we have going for us, is strong communication and strong transportation. We can still do business. As long as we can do business together, we're going to be all right. As long as we can have strong communication, we're going to be all right. When we're isolated, we fall apart. When we're connected, we stand together. We learned this, okay? Now, there was another thing that happened in the fall of the Bronze Age. They have something called the Sea People, SEA, from the ocean. It was the people from the ocean. and they don't know exactly who they were. They just call them sea people. Egypt calls them sea people. In all of the cuneiform that we find in the ruins of the cities, they call them the sea people. Basically, they were people who were displaced, who could not live in certain areas,
Hmm.
and they banded together and they moved around, and they were different nations, and they were working as individuals and groups. They weren't really a complex society where, you could sit down and you can have the person over here working on metals, the person over here working on pottery. They were a little bit more fundamental. Think about a village where everybody chips in, right? But they would go through
Right.
and they would do whatever they could to keep their families going. And you can't fault them for them, but at the same time, this was an aggravating factor. Now, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but we already see evidence of fear that this is a possibility. We have discussion inside of our country. Do we need to lock the borders and keep people out, keep them other people out, the others? When you have polarization like that, you have a drop in communications and you have fear, because without communications, you cannot measure the size of the monster. So that gives you
Right.
a good idea of where we are and what the possibilities are. Sure. And honestly, we could have a volcano easily. We've been ready for a volcano in 4 parts of the nation for 100 years. We could have another earthquake. We're due for a big one, and we could have that. But we handle it. We can handle it on top of fires. I know it. We are made for this. We've lasted through worse. Again, one of the greatest times of Rome was a horrible time. When 120 through 160, when Marcus Aurelius was in charge, you have not just a virus, you have the plague. And what happened in the plague? For 18 years, he was ruling the empire of Western civilization, and the plague was happening. Now you have all the rich people going out to their villas, out in the suburbs and out in the farms. We had that in New York State earlier this year. All the people who had second houses up in Connecticut and Hampshire and all those, they were out there doing their lockdown. Okay, and there was a lot of bad news happening. We're no different. We're no different. And and we have also we had Aurelius managing small military incursions by the Germans. He was constantly fighting the Germans out on the borders of Rome and Roman's property for those 18 years he was in charge too. And it was amazing how he was able to do this. It's fascinating. And it wasn't just him. It was a combined effort to maintain complex society. How can we keep the game of playing well together going? If you can do that, if you can actually stop the polarization, and if you can work together, win-lose does not give you a long-term goal. A life for an individual is a goal. Like, I want to be 70 years old and I want to still have a little bit of money where I can relax and not worry about things. A corporation has goals at the 100 years and 200 years and 300 years. And a society should have goals at the millennial level. This is the way we should plan if we are smart humans. But we don't plan that way, because complex society is where you get things like, building molecular computers, being able to take people to Mars. This is the big thing. This is where complex society is one of our purest strengths, and we should be more cognizant, not just of protecting nature, but protecting the ability to allow us to explore and develop and grow instead of huddling in our homes and being worried about these fears that are bigger than our heads.
Right. Tell me this, and I mean, the issues, the pandemic, this is also considered, should be considered as a pandemic, though. What are we doing, or is there a way we can actually skip this? Okay, let's talk in specific about this wildfire in California area. What could have been done to skip this? But before that, we have the reason why this happened.
So, okay, causal factors of fire are two things. Well, actually, there are three things that cause a fire. Okay.
Mhm.
Number one, you have oxygen. Number two, you have fuel. And number three, you have heat. Okay.
Mhm.
We have two. What the lands were national and they were state lands and they were private property. And not one entity managed to keep the wood and keep the weeds in such a way that they could easily ignite. And we have a lot of drought. And then we have people. And it's really funny because we have a celebration of silly things, right? They've been doing gender release parties when they find out that their child is going to be a boy or a girl. And the big fire in California, they figured out that it was one of these gender release parties that caused a spark that caused it to start. And so it's like we should have done this before. And the problem is you have a societal impact that was ignited by individual behavior. Now, compare that fire to pandemic. Coulda, shoulda,
Mhm.
woulda, right? United States is the poster child of what not to do with the pandemic, right? We need to wear our masks. We need to self-isolate. We need to actually keep things pristine, and we can control it. And we didn't do that, right? Every time we see something on the news where 40 or 50 people got together, we know somebody's going to die. A lot of people are going to be threatened. A lot of people are going to have compromised lives. And we think to ourselves, how can this possibly happen? It's because the individuals in us take actions that are not good for society. And it was Marcus Aurelius, the guy who I was talking about just a few minutes ago, who said, what's not good for society is not good for the individual. And what we have to understand is our individual actions. Me, you as an individual, me as an individual, our individual actions have an impact way beyond what we could ever comprehend. Like I said, devastation of forests happens with the start of cutting one tree down. Devastation of an entire state happens when you have a nice little party to tell your friends that your child is going to be a boy or a girl. And oops, these are the things that start things. And we have to be cognizant that it's the little steps that have potential to create these great things. And we as individuals can be much more careful. We know this with the pandemic, right? Wear your mask, keep your hands clean, keep 6 feet away from everybody. And if you continue to do that, you do that.
Right.
Now, here's the thing. There are things we can do. I've been talking on and off throughout the last few weeks, and I've been studying this for the last few years. How do I prepare for the unknown? How do I actually prepare that? Society does not prepare for the unknown. The individuals inside of society prepare for the unknown. Now, in the United States, okay, in the last 5 months, we think about preparing for the unknown is having a year's of food in the garage, making bread without yeast, doing all of these things. That's not preparing for the unknown. Preparing for the unknown is a set of intellectual skills. It's a set of preparation intellectually, emotionally, and being tied to your moral compass, so you're doing the right thing. Let's do an inventory of this, right? Knowing how to learn, knowing how to take information that I've just captured and put it together in such a way I can create new ways of responding, right? Like you've been talking about working from home and how it didn't just hinder your company, it allowed it to do new things. Second of all, purpose. When you have purpose, you'll stay up 2 hours extra every night and figure things out. You will. If you have a reason to get up, you're going to get up. Number 3, connecting to people. It's one of our strengths as a species where we can lean on each other and we can actually voice this. When you voice a fear, it goes from this to this. When you just talk to the wall, your pet, your fear goes here, here. And when you talk to another person, that fear goes from here to here to here. And when you talk to a group of people, that fear gets really small because you realize we're carrying this fear as a group, and as a group we can do big things. And name your fear, name your obstacle, give it a name, give it a quantity, because with the quantity you can measure and you can actually estimate the effort it's going to take, and you can take action against that obstacle. Fears are big because we don't wrap our heads around it and we don't measure. And then finally, be ready to use isolation, and don't be afraid of being alone. When you need to, there is strength. It's really funny. Rest and being alone in quantities actually helps us. It helps us work on the big problems. Do I need to move out of state, or do I just need to move to another part of state? Now, fear sometimes gets in the way of our lives. And when it does get us in the way of making money and taking care of our families, that's when you get professional help to come in. And if your fear is that big, I do recommend. I went through therapy about, what was it, 6 or 7 years ago, and it changed my life for the better. And boy, it's a wonderful experience. Embrace it. But again, there's so much you can do as long as it's not getting in the way of your life. You can do so much, and you can take action to where even the very unknown doesn't have impact on you.
Mhm.
And if we can do it at the individual level, we can share what we're learning with each other, and our progress as individuals is reflected back at the societal level. There are indicators right now that are saying that, and this is what I'm doing right now. I'm pulling some data, and I'll be talking about this in about a year. I'm pulling some data for the last 5 years, and I'm trying to prove that for the last 5 years, people have stopped searching for deep, complex skills that a complex society
Mhm.
embraces, and looking for fundamental skills, which are survival skills, basically. And that would be a trend that would correlate very nicely with the things that we're talking about. You have a pandemic, you have threats to society falling, and I want to see if that's happening right now. These are common things that we know in the back of our minds. But honestly, the
So what you're
best thing.
saying is basically people, yeah.
Go ahead.
So I mean, so do you mean the people are not going through the fancy terms now these days? They are more centric in terms of what can make or keep them alive into the industry.
Well, let me put it this way. My rough data analysis on the internet is showing people are looking more for how do I get a job? How do I keep a job? How do I learn new skills? They're looking more at that than they're looking at how do I learn R for big data? How do I learn SQL? How do I learn Oracle? That how do they're not looking for engineering, and they're not looking for arts, and they're not looking for the specific skills. They're looking for, how do I maintain a job? Which jobs are supporting? And again, this was predicted. This was predicted 30 years ago that this was going to happen. And we're just in that part of our society. It's just that we have the evidence of climate change. We have these things like viruses that are starting to pop up, and we still have civil unrest in many parts of our world. And just compounding all of those together are creating a need for people. And this is my question. Is all of this creating a need for people instead of learning deep sciences and specific sciences to actually learn more of these general skills? My what I teach are general skills. It's general business and general management. How do I manage and work with people, and how do I manage and work with commerce and business? And people are really interested in that right now. I don't have the numbers of how many people are interested in data science or big data. And I would be fascinated to see that. I'd like to see people in software development. If you're doing research out there, please talk to me. I'd like to see the research in whether people are embracing this, and a lot of people are studying this for career transition. That could be, but for development and research and offshoots of what we've learned in software, in our approach to writing programs and developing big complex structures. I'd like to see
Mhm.
if that still is of great interest to everybody on the planet.
No, I agree with you what you're saying out there. I mean, yeah, people has actually moved on to more the general and career saving skills rather than going out of some other courses out there. Yeah, data science, AI, these things has actually taken a back seat. I agree on that part.
But you know what, Kumar?
Yeah, so
But the funny thing is, you and I were talking not 4 or 5 weeks ago about what type of a person would I hire if I were to hire the perfect employee. Do I want to hire somebody for a language, specific language now, or would I rather hire somebody with the ability to learn a language quickly and the resilience to turn on a dime? And so it's almost like you and I are saying these skills that prepare you for the unknown are almost more valuable than these deep skills. Now, complex society, number one, gives us the ability to build the deep skills, right? It supports everybody, and people out on the fringes can do some wonderful thing. And when you don't have complex society, everybody has to sort of pitch in. But at the same point, you know, working with the unknown seems to be really good for business, and it's good for society too, to have this knowledge. Whatever is thrown at us, we'll be able to bounce back. We'll be able to figure things out together, and we'll work on this. And so I don't know that these less than complex skills are indicative of something bad. I think with the proper mindset and the proper approach, they're not showing that our society is falling apart. And this is what I wanted to talk about. They're actually showing that we could embrace these and move our society forward out of this dark time. There seems a point in a person's life where they hit a dark time, and there's a flip of a coin or a fork in the road. And some people do wonderful things, and it was a turning point to where they were incredibly successful. And you see this in society too. There were dark times, and boom, things took off. Or there were dark times, and they never were the same again. It's that point. It's that approach. And you can't point to it. You can see it looking back in history, but you can't say we're here right now. But what we do know is it's inherent in the nature of both individuals and humans to be in the middle of darkness and for some reason come out of it the better. I'm sorry. I'm not hearing you right now. Oh, is your mic on mute?
My bad. My
Oh, there
bad.
we go.
Can you hear me now?
Go ahead and repeat. Go ahead and repeat.
Yeah. So we discussed about the wildfire which has spread in the West Coast. Let's also quickly discuss on current situation of COVID. I had news yesterday that US has crossed 2 lakhs death in total so far. So how's the situation out there, Tim?
Okay, we have time. I'm going to give you a little bit of context. Okay, one part of the federal government told another part of the federal government, you don't own reporting to the public on how we're doing. And so all of a sudden, we don't trust the news. When somebody says, I own all the information, it gets scary, right? What are they trying to hide? What are they trying to spin? Okay, so we don't know. Second of all, these numbers seem to come from valid sources. And they're the numbers we have today. We have numbers at the state level, by the way, and we have the ability to pull numbers at the state level. It's just not at the federal level. And that 200 is right. And it's abysmal. At the same time, we have the places in the country that are saying, you know what, we haven't had any deaths for a few days or a week. You know what, we feel as a city we can release something, or we as a state can actually ease up. And New Mexico, where I am, has done that. And we're not being lax. No way. We want to stay ahead of the curve. Now, there was a talk early on in the United States saying we're smart, we're the smart ones, right? And what we can do is flatten the curve if we do everything perfect. And the problem is we didn't. And so we don't have a curve. We're still going up. It's not going up as slow, but we're still going up. We're allowing physical sports, team sports in education. We're thinking about bringing kids back into the school area in certain areas. Now, there are other areas of the country that are just starting to take off. Like I said, it's like a forest fire in some parts of the countries. They've isolated themselves and they felt so proud of themselves that they were a little bit lax, and the disease brought in and boom. So we're looking at a whole picture that is a complex tapestry of multiple threads. Now, at the same time, we have something happening in Europe, and either we don't know yet, but either Europe is experiencing a second wave, or like the United States, Europe is still on its first wave and it's lax. We don't know which one it is, but internal discussion here in the United States, we're nowhere near a second wave. We're still on the first wave. There's too much pushback on, isolation and wearing masks. There's too many breakout events. There's too many super spreaders. And it's a combination of individual decision making and local social decisions, like let's open up the schools, let's open up the universities, let's try to act and behave as if we're normal. Our corporations need to make money, and prioritization in this decision making is not being driven by rational thought. So again, it's pretty evident we're still on the first wave of the disease, and we're going to be there, and we're hoping and praying for a vaccine, but again, it's science is saying vaccines take time, and society is saying yes, and it's time now for you to have me a vaccine. When are you going to show up at my door? Tomorrow at 8 a.m. And so this is another one of those stressors. And again, this is human behavior. We can't get away from it.
Yeah, I mean, this is an ongoing story, Tim. Yeah, that's my personal feeling. We will not be able to see any vaccine until 2021 mid. That's my assumption. If somebody can break this assumption and bring it before that, I should be happy. But I don't see that. Yeah. However, for all the people in the States, especially in the living people out there, stay strong, stay safe. And yeah, mask is anyway up, so your bad quality of air is sort of taken care at the moment. But however, you need to take care of yourself.
Yeah,
COVID,
and again, fear. We start talking off with fear, and I want to end it. Fear is only there, and it only has an impact when we don't measure it, when we don't have a chance to actually sit back and ground ourselves and shrink it. And by taking a breath, looking at our heads, hearts, and our moral compass, and using our rational heads to make decisions, as well as connecting to our communities, we have a major opportunity, not just to manage our fears, but work as a group to innovate. And maybe the movement of people is going to change things for the better. I'm not saying fire is good. I'm not saying these events are good for people. But what I'm saying is our response to these things can be a response for the better. We've done it before. We've transitioned from wheat to barley. And there's 20 other examples of this. This is an opportunity. This is not the downfall of society.
Yeah, like we always discuss, every every roadblocks comes with an opportunity. And you rightly mentioned the fear is actually when things are uncertain, when cannot analyze certain things. The fear multiplies and goes multifold. With this, again, people out there, please stay safe, healthy, and happy. Happiness is very important to keep yourself motivated,
And
moving ahead in life. You want
very,
to have an ending sentence to the viewers out there, Tim?
I think I have. Enjoy your day. And although there are messages of darkness and gloom, these are the moments where you as an individual, as well as we as society, have an opportunity to make something even bigger and better than we've had in the past. We don't have to be separated. We can actually do this as a group.
Great. With this, thank you so much for your time, Tim, today. I look forward to have another discussion next week on some current affairs, some topic which is bothering people out there, and we'll take it up. Thank you so much for your time. Enjoy your day. People out there, have a good day ahead. Thanks for joining in. Good
Thank
day.
you.